Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
I'm Ted Bernhard with Cultiva Law. I'm a corporate transactional securities, tax, real estate attorney who specializes in the cannabis industry here, and particularly focusing on financing transactions for the cannabis industry. The speech today that I'm going to be giving is entitled Horror Stories. I kind of love this title, even though it's not just because I like 80s horror movies, which I do like, but somehow I just kind of feel like horror stories captures the moment that we're living in this industry right now pretty well. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the horror stories that I've had or heard about with clients of mine and people that I've known, with kind of a goal to help you avoid falling into some of the pitfalls that they have run into, and frankly prevent yourself from getting scammed, because there's a lot of scams going on out there in the startup world in general, but even more specifically in the cannabis area. How did this speech come about? Well, it first started out with a conversation that Mary Lou Burton, the organizer of this conference, and I had at a ORCA meeting, or Oregon Retail Cannabis Association. And as it happened, Mary Lou and I were sort of after the main event, sitting around chatting with each other, and we were both talking about some of the clients that we were working on together and separately, and talking about the conference and networking and things like that. But the more we talked, we kept finding ourselves going in circles. We kept coming back to all these, if you will, horror stories of clients that we were working with. Now, don't get me wrong, both Mary Lou and I are professionals, and not all of our clients are facing horrors. We've helped a lot of them to avoid the horrors, and that's kind of the purpose of this presentation. But anyway, as she and I started talking about this, it was both of our jaws, I think, were kind of dropping with how many just outright scams there were that were floating around the cannabis industry, and how much we'd experienced firsthand. And so from that conversation, I think we both realized that, one, we weren't alone in experiencing this or observing this sort of thing, and two, it validated for us that it does seem to be happening with an increased frequency in this industry. Example of that, right before this presentation here, Mary Lou stopped by and dropped this pile of cards off to me. And what these are invitations that she sent out this year to the conference. She sent out, I think, 1,900 to Washington State in Washington. These are the ones that got returned from businesses without any forwarding address and returned to sender, that she had on her list as active cannabis businesses a year ago. This entire pile came back. So what we're seeing is apparently pretty huge turnover, and that that sort of leads me to believe that there are definite there are definite reasons that businesses are not turning out to be successful in this area. So that was kind of the beginning of the whole conversation, and since then I'm pretty clumsy today. I've spent I think way too many hours thinking about this topic, as that particularly how did we get to this point where I'm having to have this talk right now to this industry. I mean, this is a new industry. There are a lot of the good, solid community. The participants are genuinely committed to doing something good for society. Why are there so many shysters and hustlers and con artists in this industry? Now, I've been practicing for about 25 years now, and so I've seen a lot of different industries, different individuals, different companies, and a lot of different scams. And so, I mean, what I started wondering was, is this really anything different than what I saw in the dot-com bubble in the 90s or the mortgage bubble in the mid-2000s or the clean energy tax credit bubble that we saw in the end of the 2000s? Or is this just really the same sort of thing that happens all the time in new industries? As I was kind of contemplating that question the other day over coffee in the morning newspaper, the Washington Post, I came across an article about the Fry Festival. I don't know whether you guys have heard about that or not, but it was supposed to be a music festival at an island in the Caribbean that cost like $100,000 or something to attend, and then it turned out to basically have people living in tents with cheese sandwiches and no artists performing, and just a big scam. People are going to jail for it. But anyway, Netflix and Hulu just sort of came out with documentaries about it. It happened about a year or two ago. And so the Times was talking about the, excuse me for 1 second here, so these don't fall on the floor. I'm just gonna put them on the floor. So the headline that got my attention was, yes, it takes 2 Fry Festival film documentaries to fully convey how easily we're all scammed. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it caught my attention, and I started reading through the article, and I came up with, about in the middle of the article, there was this quote that really stuck with me, and this is what I wanted to share with you. It says, the author said in this paragraph, he says, "It's no surprise that the 21st century is rife with epic degrees of fraud and gullibility. It can be as simple as someone creating a self-image on social media that is so enviably perfect that they can become a paid influencer simply on the fantasy that they are cooler than you. It can also be as complicated as an oft-failed businessman rebranding himself and getting elected president." I'm not touching that. And the quote that really stuck with me was from a senior writer from the New Yorker magazine. He said, "In the millennial era, scamming is the very air we breathe." I was like, whoa, scamming is the air we breathe? That's quite a statement. But that sort of validated what I've been observing and what Mary Lou has been observing. And frankly, I sat through 2 presentations before mine, and each one of them sort of made a point to talk about the dangers of the scam artists in this industry and how to protect yourself from them. So anyway, I think we're on the right track. And bear with me, I just want to make one more point, and then I'm going to dive into like the practicalities of what you can do to avoid being scammed, how do you recognize them, and more importantly, I want to share with you the real world examples of the scams that I've come in contact with personally with clients or heard about friends and people I'm working with getting involved with, so that you can avoid them. But on that question that's in the back of my mind is, are these scams different than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Or are we seeing, the exact same thing just amplified by social media? After thinking about that a lot, I think I've got a preliminary hypothesis, and that is that they are different. And the reason I think it's different is in the old days, and I'm talking like 10 or 15 years ago or whatever, there was sort of an unspoken consensus among investors and entrepreneurs and investment bankers and venture capitalists and angels and those sorts of things, that it took time and effort to build a company, and that true investors were sort of in it for the long haul. And the long haul was 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And so the sort of entry point to discussions, serious discussions with real investors, was that mentality that it's a long-term investment, and you're going to be in partnership with whoever you're either investing in or taking money from for a long time until you can get to a liquidity event. And so the people that were the shysters, the people that were trying to exploit the system, really became apparent very quickly in the process, because they would be the ones that are always offering the quickest turnaround, the millions and millions of dollars within 6 months, or 500% IRR on your money, or things like that. And so everyone kind of knew implicitly that anyone that was offering that was not playing by the rules, was a little more towards the untrustworthy side. But what I'm seeing now, and this is what causes me to lose sleep at night, and what I think should cause us all to be a bit wary, is that this new generation, as you'll see, of scams that I'm talking about, is not so easily identifiable because it's coming from within the system. What's happened, apparently, in my observation, is that people have been able to adopt the language of long-term investing, of entrepreneurship, about short-term sacrifice for long-term gain, about collaborative partnerships, and, if you will, almost weaponize those words and use them to promote very non-socially beneficial, selfish types of behavior that really just are about divvying up a larger portion of the zero-sum pie of immediately cash on hand and then trying to get away with it without getting caught. And so there's a fundamental difference there, whereas before people weren't able, for whatever reason, to get away with mimicking the core tenets of entrepreneurship and long-term business building, but today they somehow have educated themselves or are able to fake it better, it seems, than before. So anyway, with that cheerful introduction out of the way, I want to kind of shift gears a bit here and turn to the practical side of things. How do we, here we all are in the cannabis industry. I'm assuming many or most of you are entrepreneurs in the industry, and probably most of you are seeking fundraising. So how do you go about that process without getting scammed or taken advantage of in the process? So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to kind of talk to you about the preliminary warning signs that you might be getting involved with a scam, and a lot of those are fairly obvious, but they bear quick repeating. Second, I'm going to give you some advice, some general advice about what to do if you find yourself face-to-face with a potential scam. And then third, I'm going to put some flesh on the bones of the discussion here, and I'm gonna walk you through at least 4 or 5 of the biggest scams that I see affecting the cannabis industry right now, and tell you how and why to avoid them. And then finally, I'm gonna just touch real briefly on what to do if you do get scammed, what sort of remedies are available to you, and how do you protect yourself after that. And then after that, I'm gonna take questions from the audience. Feel free to, if you have questions as I say something, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to entertain them along the way too. But I don't want this to be, this is the second speech I gave. I just gave it to the investors as well. I don't want this to be doom and gloom, Armageddon. I want this to be sort of practical, keep the entrepreneurial spirit, try to find ways to make things work without getting taken advantage of and your values compromised and your pocketbook picked. So that's the sort of the spirit that I'm talking about here. All right, so jumping right into the warning signs of potential scams. As I said, the first sort of rule of thumb about how to avoid getting scammed is probably just, I would say, awareness. In other words, just the fact that you guys are sitting here listening to me right now on this rainy day, you've probably taken that first step, but until you acknowledge that there are a lot of malevolent players out there that are deliberately deceptive, deliberately fraudulent, deliberately trying to manipulate things, you're going to be at a disadvantage. Now, I'm not saying everyone is like that. There's plenty of well-established, well-intentioned players that those are the people you want to partner with out there. But until you acknowledge that there are a lot of people that are opportunists who are getting into this industry because of its relatively new nature and rapid growth possibility and things like that are out there, you could be setting yourself up to be exploited by people like that. So the first red alert and the biggest warning sign, and this is actually almost a case study in one of the biggest scams going on. So many people out there hold themselves out as being money finders for people and money raisers that don't actually have the capital under management for investment at the current time. And if you've been around this industry for a while, or any other like tech industries or anything like that, there are tons of people that say they want to invest, that have the money to invest, that they hold themselves out as angel investors or venture capitalists or private equity or to nonprofit investors, anything like that, or brokers. A lot of people are even holding themselves out as brokers. Very few of those people actually have legitimate fundraising sources. When I say legitimate fundraising sources, what I mean is that they have either themselves or through a business that they are in charge of readily available capital of the amount that you need to get an investment from. So not only do they have the actual cash, they have the literal legal authority to invest that cash if they want. And what is so common in all these emerging industries is brokers who hold themselves out as being one of those types of people and saying that they have this money or can get this money on short notice or are ready to invest when really they have to go back out and raise the money after they've agreed to the terms with you or start negotiating with you or things like that. So how do you sort out, this is one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of entrepreneurs at the early stages have, how do you sort out the legitimate money sources from the illegitimate money sources? Well, I think the biggest couple of items to keep in mind are, if you're the one raising money and they ask for a fee from you up front, that should be a big warning sign. First of all, just so you know, people who are acting as brokers need to be licensed by the SEC. It's securities law, and if people are acting as intermediaries between funding sources and companies, they need to be licensed. Now, people who are consultants or money finders or things like that, there are exceptions that those people can provide valuable services and not be required to register. But the first step is, if they're acting as a broker, holding themselves as a broker, are they actually registered as a broker? And you can check that with the SEC. But second of all, regardless of registration or not, if they're telling you that they need a retainer up front from you to prove that you're worthy of that you're worthy of their time, or they're talking about non-refundable expenses or things like that, walk away. I mean, there are legitimate funding sources. Legitimate investors invest with the expectation of a return over the long haul. They're not trying to scam you out of $10,000 or $15,000 up front and then walk away because they can't perform. The brokers that do that, or the people that do that, are the ones that basically know that they can't perform because technically they get a percentage if the deal is successful, and are just trying to squeeze as much out of you as possible. So be super careful about that. I'm not saying all money brokers are bad. I think it's important to have good networks and find legitimate money sources, but just be super careful about that. The other thing that's sort of a huge red alert is, and this one recurs over and over again, if the people you're talking to, if the process seems too quick or too simple or too easy, like their due diligence process, then forget about it. If they're cutting shortcuts on these types of investment decisions where multi-millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars are at stake, you can almost be guaranteed that they're not legitimate investors. It takes time. People can move fast in the internet age, but it takes time to draft documents, negotiate term sheets, do iterations back and forth between lawyers and things like that. And if they're promising, oh, I'll have you this money by the end of the week or the next 72 hours or whatever, all we have to do is blah, blah, blah. No, that's not how it works. And also, true investment funds have partners and boards that they are responsible to, and those people make the investment decisions, so they have to do due diligence and make reports to the investors, get their approval, then go through all the other stuff that I was talking about. So anyone that's sort of promising to get you money super easily or in a abbreviated form of the process, watch out for. Let me see here. Yeah. So how to avoid getting scammed in the first place? My advice is, if your spidey senses are telling you that this looks like a scam, just check your ego at the door and walk away. There's plenty of other fish. I know it doesn't seem like that when you're a struggling entrepreneur, but there's plenty of legitimate fundraising sources out there. And if something gives you the creepy crawlies, then just move on. You're probably right. There's the percentage of scammers to legitimate is so high that you have to have the confidence to be able to walk away from that sort of thing. But the best, I think, protection against getting scammed is not a single thing. It's constantly triangulating on the people you're dealing with, whether that means doing a background check on people, whether that means talking to your personal network, asking for representative deals that they've done, asking for documentation on their investment fund, doing a credit or criminal background check on them, looking on the SEC for other transactions they've been involved, all those sorts of things. None of them in and of themselves is going to be a guarantee that you're going to catch someone who's being disingenuous about what they're doing. But together, you got a pretty good chance. The way I kind of look at it is it's sort of like pattern recognition. If you think of a TV screen and every data point that you have sort of being a pixel on that TV screen, if you just have 1 pixel or 2 pixels, you can't really see the picture. But if you have 10 or 15 or 20, it gradually starts coming into focus and you can see what you're dealing with. And so I strongly recommend having enough data to, people's true colors tend to come out, and people, weirdly, they actually tend to just tell you what they are if you give them enough time. And so give them a chance, listen, ask questions, ask for documents, and if they get offended at that, run. I mean, seriously, if someone's legitimate, why would they be offended at being asked to prove that they're legitimate? If they get defensive, that's a huge thing. One recommendation that I would have for anyone who's interested in this topic is there's a great book called The Confidence Game, Why We Fall For It Every Time, that came out in 2016. It's written by by Maria Konnikova, and she's a Harvard and Columbia University PhD in psychology. And it's just a fascinating book from a cognitive and social psychologist who not only describes like the theoretical basis of why it's so easy to get taken advantage of and hustled and conned, but also she interviewed some of the most famous con artists around. Like, I don't know whether you saw the movie Catch Me If You Can, but I think she talked to that guy and writes several chapters about his story in the book. And it's just a very revealing dynamic. And I recommend that if you get a chance. It's not a super long book. It's only like 100, 150 pages or whatever, but it's well worth the time to get sort of a framework. And you'll come away going, oh man, I feel like I could be vulnerable to that too after you read it. And I think that's a good inoculation. All right, so that's sort of my preaching and the general topics, but here, this is kind of what I really wanted to get to today, and that is talking about the actual scams that we are seeing in 2019 in the cannabis and the CBD space. I have to give a caveat before I go into these. Almost all scams sort of originate with one bit of truth or one successful transaction or whatever. So please, when I'm listing off these scams, don't take what I'm saying as saying everything that sounds like this in this particular category is a scam. What I'm saying is that while there may be some truth in these particular categories of scams, and there are certainly examples of success, the vast majority of the transactions in here are not those successful ones. And if you decide to go ahead with them, just know that you're trying to buck the odds, and that there are a lot more people out there that have been hurt and harmed and lost their money from trying to follow these things than actually succeeded. So the first one, and probably the most prevalent one that I've seen over the past couple of years, is what I call the Canadian shell company scam. And if any of you are in the industry and have tried to raise a significant amount of money here in the Northwest, you probably run into this one way or another. It's not an outright scam. Okay, I just read an article about a guy who literally is a billionaire on paper right now because he orchestrated one of these these transactions in the cannabis industry within the last year, and he's got publicly traded stock on NASDAQ that makes him a billionaire. So it can be done, but what you have to understand is that there's a lot of interest, and there has been over the past couple of years, specifically in Canada, in investing in U.S.-based cannabis operations of one form or another. The securities markets up in Canada are very differently regulated than the U.S. securities markets. They are more permissive in terms of the fact that what they allow is they allow these blind pool companies up there, which are really nothing more than a shell company, to operate, be registered, and raise investment capital. And so what you have is you have an entire industry up there of empty companies looking for a business to merge with or acquire or buy the assets of, and an entire brokerage industry built around promoting those sorts of things. And so what we've seen happening a lot recently is that those promoters, those brokers have reached out or shown an interest in cannabis companies in Oregon and Washington, and they usually propose some sort of reverse merger acquisition where the operating company, your company, that has the licenses or the real estate or the intellectual property or whatever, gets acquired by the Canadian shell company in a reverse merger. And then after that merger is done, they're already registered on the exchanges up there, and they promise that they can raise additional money, which will expand the growth operations of the businesses. The problem is, one, in the process, a lot of times the selling company, the actual operating company, loses a substantial amount of control in the process at the board level, at the shareholder level, at the management level, and find themselves without being able to basically control their own destiny or their own business. And they have to live with that whether they like it or not after this fact. And then the whole thing is premised on the ability to raise additional capital through this registered, now combined shell company. And it's not a slam dunk, even though the brokers would like you to believe that you can do that. There are some stigmas associated with Canadian exchanges. The people know that the brokers up there are more promoters than transaction facilitators, and so there's a ton of companies that I've dealt with that have been approached by or have tried to do transactions with these Canadian shell companies promising millions, tens of millions of dollars for cannabis businesses based here in the States. And like I said, there's at least one that's succeeded, only one that I know of, but the rest of them I've been on the backside in litigation trying to work out the fact that people feel like the promises were never upheld by the Canadian side, and they lost control of their company and their assets and their brand and the business that they'd been trying to build for the past 4 years. So if it sounds really good, investigate it. There are legitimate ways to do that, but just be super careful. The second, what I would call scam is what I refer to as the master grower scam. And it's a tricky one because this one really is specific to the cannabis industry. It basically involves new investment dollars that are from investors who aren't experienced or familiar with the cannabis industry wanting to get into the industry, and people who have frankly been operating in the cannabis industry in the gray or black markets previous to legalization, who've developed a certain amount of expertise in growing, operating, selling cannabis-related products. And so it would seem like a natural partnership between those two entities. But the problem that seems to come about is that there are two very different attitudes in terms of how to build a cannabis business, sort of the black gray market version and the fully legitimate licensed version. And what I see happen very, very often is that you form the initial partnership, the intellectual property and the expertise is contributed by the master grower. The investors put a significant amount of money into the business. After about the first year or so of operations, they realize that 280E and other things make it, and oversupply make it really difficult to make a profit. And so what happens is that they revert to kind of their gray market, black market days, and the product ends up going out the back door, frankly, for a higher price and a tax-free type of price. And then you've got a real mess on your hands because everyone has a fiduciary duty to the company. You have duties to report to the licensing boards, stolen property. You probably are reluctant to go into civil litigation because of the fact that it could bring up criminal aspects of things. And it's just an absolute mess in terms of the situation that you find yourself in. And so I realize you guys this was more for the investors than the entrepreneurs, but it's one scam that I'm seeing a lot of. The next one is we already talked about it, sort of the money finder scam. I just add one sort of footnote to that. There's a particularly weird and disturbing scam going around right now that relates to the money finder type of thing. It's basically all the things I talked about before with the money finder, except that these people are claiming to be money finders who have access to money because they have some secret connections on Wall Street to do backdoor trading, interbank trading or something like that, that will basically allow them to make such a profit that they can then lend the money back at cheap rates to the company who's working with them. And they usually charge a fee up front for that. And what they try and do is they try and convince the entrepreneur to put a certain amount of money in trust or escrow, claiming that they can't use it until it's successful, and that by putting that money into escrow, it will enable them to operate on the back end in a trading system that will create such great profits that they'll be able to turn it back around and lend it back to the company as a credit line. It sounds ridiculous, but you'd be astonished at like the credentials of the people that are promulgating this type of thing. They're lawyers, they're experienced financial executives. They deal with like the largest banks, and it's not just cannabis that they're targeting. I mean, I'm seeing this in commercial real estate, the tech industry, all those sorts of things. So I just wanted that one, I don't know where that came from or what's happening with that, but that's one to watch for because I've had at least a half dozen of my clients, come to me with, oh, we've got a way to get a credit line for $5 million at 4% or something like that. And I'm like, Next topic is I call this the hemp CBD industry scam, and another word for it is the broker's 6 levels deep scam. Hemp is just exploding right now. The interest in hemp transactions, both on the buy side and the sell side, and CBD products, and a ton of brokers have jumped into the game. Well, it's gotten ridiculous. It's gotten to the point where, no one trusts anyone because all the brokers are claiming that they have product on the sell side, and all the buyers are claiming they have money on the buy side. But really, they all just have relationships that are 6 degrees of separation from each other. And it's so prevalent right now, and the distrust is so high that in order to do a transaction on the sell side, I've literally had to do proof of life for hemp products, where like I am asked, I've been shown video footage of specific crops at specific locations with newspapers showing the date and my name written on the video so that I can prove that they actually have the product. And even that isn't sufficient because it just shows it physically exists. It doesn't show that they actually have it under control or the authority. And then on the sell side, on the buy side, the sellers are so skeptical that the buyers are just brokers that don't have any money that they are actually asking for proof of funds that goes to a level I haven't really seen before. They're asking for, I had one lawyer tell me that the only way he would do a transaction with my buyer was if I personally, as a lawyer and a fiduciary, would vouch to him that I had in my own firm's escrow account the full amount of the purchase price for the product and would write him a letter to the effect saying that it was under my control, that they parted with the money, and we were under agreement to use it for this purpose. I've never seen another industry where this level of paranoia and craziness is coming in. So, if you're dealing in hemp or CBD right now and you're dealing with brokers, just be super careful. What to do if after it's happened? Well, you don't have to throw your hands up in the air. Not all is lost. Look, people get scammed all the time. We're all human and we're all subject to that. So I wanted to just talk really briefly about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So it should be obvious what you shouldn't do, okay? Don't threaten the other person, right? That's criminal, okay? That's assault or battery or something like that. Don't do self-help. Don't break into their land and steal their crops or or try and repossess your equipment or whatever. That's trespassing. That's theft. That's illegal. That's conversion. Also, please don't engage in a social media war trying to discredit them. You're just opening yourself up to potential defamation claims and libel claims and things like that. I know it's frustrating and you want to do everything you can to resolve the situation, but those things are counterproductive. What is productive, however, is first of all, talk to your lawyer. He probably has some good advice about how to deal with that sort of situation. Lawyers there's a whole range of things that legal action can look like. It can be as simple as sort of a demand letter to people. Most of these jaded shysters aren't going to respond to that, but you can file a civil lawsuit. You can, one thing that people often forget, if it's a fairly small amount of money, you can go after them in small claims court for up to $10,000 in Oregon. And I've seen that work very effectively because a lot of times the defendant won't even respond to the complaint. They know they're in the wrong and they know they're going to lose. And attorneys are prohibited from participating in those hearings, and so you don't have attorney's fees on top of things. It's not a bad thing to think about if it's sort of a small type of thing. The other thing that attorneys can help you do is kind of point you to law enforcement agencies. People don't often necessarily think about, look, stealing someone's product, it's not just breach of contract, it could be theft, okay? It could be actual criminal activity. So the police department, if it's a federal issue, the FBI, and that's in addition to like the civil enforcement agencies like the DOJ at the state and federal level. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is another avenue. And then the last one that people always want to throw into the mix is they want to go to the licensing boards about these sorts of things. That's kind of a mixed bag. First of all, I want to be really clear. If you're the license holder, you may have a duty to report this to the licensing board anyway, and so it may not be an option. But if there is discretion one way or another into what you report, it's very difficult because someone else's wrongdoing could be attributed to you under your supervision, and so bringing it to the licensing board could actually jeopardize your asset, your license, and things like that. So it's kind of like, I kind of look at that as really a last resort as to what you can do. But the point I would make about this is don't give up and pursue all options depending upon the situation. I have seen recoveries. I have seen people just get, these scam artists, you become more of a headache to them than it's worth, and they'll just cough up the, some portion of the money or whatever, and you can all get on with your life. It's not easy because they anticipate this, but don't give up hope completely. All right, so in conclusion, before I take any last questions that there may be, I want to end with this story from that Confidence Game book that I was telling you about, because it's such a crazy story that it just stuck with me, but I think it captures the essence of the whole dilemma really well. So in that book, there's a story about a guy, I think it was back in the 70s, maybe the 80s, who essentially got promised by some shady characters that if he placed a bet with them on a horse race, they had inside information about which horse was going to win the race. And so the guy believed him and gave them their money to place the bet for him on the horse. As it as you can expect, it turned out that, one, the horse didn't win. They didn't have any inside knowledge. But two, they'd never even placed the bet in the first place. They just pocketed his money knowing that there was no way that the horse was going to win. And so the guy ended up losing all of his money. So anyway, the same guy, like 6 months, 7 months later or whatever, was walking through the street, and he came across this same group of people who just defrauded him out of his money. And he started walking towards them, and it's told from the scammer's perspective, so he's the one sharing this, and he says that when the guy walked up to them, they were terrified. They thought he was going to punch them out or attack them or threaten to report him to the authorities or something like that. But the guy walked up with a giant smile on his face, and he greeted them warmly, and he thanked them so kindly for trying to share the information with him before, and asked them, begged them if he could give them some more money to make another bet this time that would work. My point is, don't be that guy, okay? If something happens to you and you get taken advantage of, learn from it. We're human. Don't be ashamed of it. Maybe communicate. That's why I'm doing this, is to kind of try and help people avoid these sorts of things. And because if you don't, you're just going to fall into the same traps over and over again. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day.
Well, they can also have the technology, the face recognition technology is so advanced, all they do is got to get a shot of your eyes. And if you have a picture ID anywhere in the federal or state system, they can identify you to where you live. So there's a double identification.
There's a camera right behind you right now.
Yeah, well, that's right, but they know me. We introduced ourselves years ago. And everybody, and nobody's catching on. Oh, that there's dangerous games going on here. People better. So I think it was a setup, all right? I think it was a setup because whatever they've got planned for the future, whatever's coming, and they're stepping off in that direction. But they want to know who their opposition is. They want to identify their opposition so they know who they're going to take first when the real stuff hits the fan. When they get real serious about what they're going to start doing, all right, they are going to know who to go after first. All right, and we're handing, all right, because we believe in freedom. We believe in freedom. All right, so because we believe in freedom, they're getting ready to change that. All right, they're getting ready. And I say this because, and not as a fearmonger, but just because I know we can I know we can influence how things go with clarity. But I'm saying this because, see, my generation, we're on our way out. You know what I mean? They're not that worried about us. I mean, they may round some of us up because they just don't like us, but they're not that worried about us. All right? I'm saying this, they're after you, the next generation. You're the ones that they're after. And don't, and I'm just going to say it, and we'll see where destiny goes. All right? But my own personal feeling is they're getting ready to set up the American gulags, all right? But they're not going to call them gulags, all right? Because there are things going on in this country, that politically, well, I'll put it like this. The way the robbing is going on the planet right now, the way the wealth is being concentrated, there's excessively large numbers of poor, all right? Excessively large numbers of poor, all right? And they're going to deal with those excessively large numbers of poor, but not in ways that we believe that they're going to. They're going to round up people. The largest growing industry in America are private prisons. That's the largest growing industry in America is the private prison industry. How are they going to take care of the poor? They're going to lock a great many of them up and put them to work for $1 a day, right? And make them be productive, right? And these kinds of things are coming. And people really need to start thinking about what's going on, all right? Because we're never going to outfight them. This is not going to happen, all right? But they want us to believe that we have a chance if we fight them, all right? Reality is we can outthink them, but they don't want us thinking about that. They do not want us to think about that, so they will push emotional buttons because they know that we've been emotionally primed to emotionally react. And if we emotionally react, we're not thinking clearly and coherently. All right? Have you ever had an emotional outburst and then later think, well, I wish I'd have said this or I'd have said that? That's me. So you're not thinking clear. Right? I do it all the time. So people don't take me serious anymore. You know? No. But it's for us to take the responsibility. To recognize that we're human beings. Take the responsibility to understand if we claim any spiritual identity to anything, to take the responsibility that we can only show that spiritual. We can most effectively show that spiritual consciousness by being conscious of the power of our intelligence and how we use it. Yeah. And we start to take those responsibilities upon ourselves, right? Then we can change this dynamic. And that's the reality. On an individual basis, just individually. Make the decision to think as clearly and coherently as possible. And see how it changes your individual life. Right? Because the thing about when we think, we project electromagnetic energy. Electromagnetic. So if we're tossing low self-esteem, the chaos of low self-esteem in its different fragments as a part of our consciousness, then that's what we're going to attract. If we're putting clarity and coherency out there, then that's what we're going to get back. That's the part of the power of the people they don't want us to understand. That we can help. Theoretically, if everyone got up tomorrow and said, I will not enable what I know to be a lie, it would all change. And so that the occupiers don't misunderstand. I'm not picking on anybody, right, or doing any other thing like that, but I do think that this needs to be thought out before we call people out to do stuff, right? And because I'm saying this because, I think that it's time for the next generation, well, our generation, but I think it's time to think in the terms of non-cooperation versus civil disobedience. I think civil disobedience is a trick. I think it's a trick, it's a trap, all right? And it's how they tag us with the magic markers, all right, so that they can identify who we are, right? They have the electronic know-how now to do that. So I think we should be careful. I'm not saying there shouldn't be any public protest, but we should not build whatever it is we're looking for through that, because if we use our intelligence clearly and coherently, we'll see it doesn't work. If we want to be honest and authentic, it doesn't work. So we need to recognize that. Because civil disobedience, whether it's violent or non-violent, whether it's with permission or not, is cooperating with them. Because it's a part of the lie they tell us, that by that public protest we can have an influence. So we're cooperating with them. All right? But we're cooperating with them down to the point of we buy magic markers to make our signs. We buy our little bottles of water. We buy our health food, or we buy our junk food, and then we buy gas, we buy plane tickets, we buy whatever to get to the demonstration. Right? So economically we're cooperating with them. If we do it with permits, we're cooperating. If we do it without permits, they get to come and practice war games on us. All right? Police tactics, so they know how to do crowd control. Right? So it's about non-cooperation. To think in terms of non-cooperation. If everything is designed that when I do this, I'm feeding the energy or economics or something into their system, then it's time to think, how do I not cooperate? It can be from, like as an example, all the time and money that went into the Occupy movement. Everything that's defined as energy, time, money, anything, that went into the Occupy movement had been put into telling the American people, look, let's get together. This is about economics. Let's get together and not spend any money on one day as a unified force, as a unified group. Let's not spend any money on one day. The objective being get 1/3 of the population to do it, and they can't ignore you. Cannot be ignored. Because was not the Occupy movement basically in reality about middle class being made poor? This is reality. All right? So if it's about economics, then think in different terms. But going out there, because if I was the bad guys, I'd have created the Occupy movement just to find you. It's something because they benefited. What did the occupiers get as a benefit out of it, other than the emotional rush of being able to emotionally vent? But when we stand here where we're at now, what was gotten out of it? See, we need to be able to examine and look at our activities, right? But if I go and say this to most places, see, people are going to get on, they're going to get defensive, they're not going to know what I'm saying. But, you know, but I'm putting it out there for those that do, and whoever gets it, gets it. But I think non-cooperation. And let's go to another level, because the level that I'm most concerned about on non-cooperation is, I think, an act of non-cooperation is to think for myself. I think a level of non-cooperation is this low self-esteem. Get over that stuff. All right? No. See, I grew up in a generation where self-esteem wasn't even a term, so I have a hard time relating to it. Self-esteem. Right? You know, we didn't talk about self-esteem. You know, they put that in, and then they start programming. Next generation, well, yeah, low self-esteem. No, man, you're messing with me. That's what the problem is. Oops. Okay, so we need to look, all right, like ourselves. Understand there's nothing wrong with us. That, you know, and the things that are distorted, well, if we recognize rather than judge, we can balance that distortion stuff. To like ourselves, right? To not use pride as our way through. To truly be grateful, right? To truly be grateful for what there is to be grateful for. Don't let them lead us around by our pride. Understand the difference between humility and pride, because humility and pride, they just can't live together. I'm sorry, they can't live together. I come from a spiritual, I still have enough of my spiritual memory left to know that my humility was a danger, all right, to the religious pride. That's why they went after us. See, so these are things, we need to start thinking about things that we just have refused to think about. You know, and that's just, you know, and about this sexism stuff, I'm going to toss this out there too, you know. For the women, don't blame it all on the men. Women raised us. So everybody's got a role in this. Reality. Everybody's got a role in this. See, in this whole division, this whole gender thing. And I'm not making excuses for anybody any way across the deal. Alright? But if the man grew up bad, or whatever all that stuff is, he had a mother. You know, I hear all these jokes about penis, man, and that, you know. But every penis, every woman grew the penis before it came out here. So let's all take some responsibility on what's going on as human beings, rather than allowing them to make this other thing. Anyway, now before I get in trouble, no, I'm desperate. I want us to think about anything, right? I won't even go into democracy. Okay, well, I'm going to read a few more of these and quit. But anything that I said that makes sense to you, right on. If I didn't make sense to you, I don't want to hear about it. All right? Because they're just butting heads. Because if I didn't make sense to you and you're going to come tell me about it, then you're not making sense to me.
I won't take up a lot of time because I know there are things that have to happen here. But I want to say I appreciate being here, and I'm glad to be able to be invited here. And I appreciate that you're here. Because, you know, I really liked the energy that comes out of your community. Because in my reality, everything is about energy. I mean, it's in every reality, but anyway, how I see things sometimes, everything is about energy. And I like the energy that I feel here and that is generated here. I really, really relate to what you've been doing with the whole concept of medical marijuana, from getting it accepted to the way of distribution of it here in the state of Oregon, or at least in Portland where I'm at. You know, it's not about profiteering. It's truly about the medicinal need. You know, and I operate out of Southern California, and in Southern California, it's, to me, I hear the rhetoric and the words, but I sense it's more about profiteering and profit than it is about the medicinal need. See, so I say I really appreciate that here in this place, that it isn't being, the medicine part of it isn't being forgotten. You know, because I think that it is in a lot of places. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, but this is about medical marijuana just in general, no, wherever. I think that if the political and social movement groups and organizations that operate in this country today had the same kind of energetic commitment that the medical marijuana people have, I think that many things could change in this country. All right? And that just because, you know, I mean, we go back, it's been a long thing, but we go back 20 years, you know, this was an impossibility where everything stood. But you go back 20 years, all of the other situations were just as intense for their time and place, but in the passage of 20 years, see, something has been accomplished here, energetically, consciously. But you can't say that about any other aspect of the political system. See, so there's something that happens, that's just happening that I can't really define, but it can be felt, it's being seen, you know, and so if the energy that the people here carry into all of this, if somehow, you know, this whole understanding could be reached. Because when I look at what's going on, you know, especially with the political organizations, everybody chasing it's just, they're getting nowhere. The situation's just getting worse for all the issues, except here, in the area of this medicine. And it's like the energy, and it's like, you know, it's like we're children of the plant, you know, and that energy is being carried out. You know, and at some point I would really like to see this thing start to expand and go into where the same single-minded focus is put on hemp as earth medicine, medicinal medicine for the earth, under the whole concept of their green economy, of the whole concept of alternative energy, you know, and at some point, if that kind of energy can be put into the focus of hemp, not cannabis and hemp, but as a parallel energy being put out there, you know, and maybe at some point in time this will start to morph into this kind of a thing. But for real, because I kind of wander around some seriously crazy realities, right? But whatever it is, somehow whatever's going on makes a lot of sense in what's being done. See, so for me, I hear grassroots, I hear all these different things and the labels going on. But if there is such a thing as grassroots organizing, you are it. You know, this is where it truly is. I mean, I hear it as terminology about different political issues and things, but sometimes I don't know if there's really any, you know, if it's really about grassroots. But that's just my cynicisms. Right? So anyway, for me, as me being who I am, I appreciate the energy that you bring. You know, and because it's about more than an energy of resistance. It's about, to me, I sense it's about an energy of non-cooperation. See, in some type of a way, the children of the plant aren't cooperating. It's about more than just resisting and protesting. It's about more than that. There's a lack of cooperation. They're not cooperating with the mindset, all right, with the imprinted brainwashing that has been taking place. See, the children of the plant don't cooperate with that around this issue. See, but everybody else, all the movements, they're cooperating with their political, social, economic enemy. They're cooperating with it even when they protest. They build their thing around protest. When they build it just around voting, they're cooperating because they're still believing the imprinted mindset that things